Now you might be thinking, okay, that's fine. But what about that? Let's read it one more time. Person is justified by works and not by faith alone. Because after all, we've read Galatians chapter 2, verse 15, where the Apostle Paul says, describing a conversation he once had with Peter, we ourselves are Jews by birth and not Gentile sinners, yet we know that a person is justified not by works of the law, but through faith in Jesus Christ. And we're thinking, well, which one is it, guys? Justified by works, not by faith alone, or not by works, but through faith in Jesus? And we're kind of at this place where, like, we believe the Bible, we trust the Bible. I trust the Bible. Let me just tell you, if I didn't trust the Bible, I would get a different job. I wouldn't get up at 4 o'clock on Sunday mornings to get here to do this if I didn't think it was truthful and effective to reveal God's heart and mind and clarify our mission and bring us into a deeper experience of his life. So what do we do with it? What's going on? Like, what are these guys? How does it mesh? And why have Christians been worried about this for at least 500 years? How we think about God's work in our lives. Here's the suggestion. There is evidence in the New Testament, we're looking at some of it now, that the first century Christians, had some debate and even had to respond to some misunderstandings about the relationship between faith and works. That's a debate that's gone on through the history of the church, and it looks like it got started in the first century. What's the evidence that the debate was happening and that people were misunderstanding things? In Romans chapter 3, verse 8, the Apostle Paul says this: why not say, as some people slander us by saying that we say, let us do evil so that good may come? You ever noticed that verse before? Usually when we talk Romans 3, we're in verse 21 through the end of the chapter. But in Romans 3:8, it's even in the New Revised Standard Version, it's got a parenthesis around it, which has to suggest that it's kind of a side thought or something. But listen to what he says. Again, someone, Paul says, is slandering him. That means they're saying something about him that isn't true. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand if anybody's ever said something about you that wasn't true, but you know how it feels. Someone, Paul says, is slandering me by saying something that they say I said that I never said or that's not true. So what is it? What are they saying? And here's what they're saying. He said, let us do evil so that good may come. Let us do evil so that good may come. Now, we read Paul a lot. Can you imagine anyone walking away from the letters of Paul thinking he's good with someone saying, hey, let's do more evil? That sounds kind of wild, doesn't it? So how do we get there? Like, what did he say that had someone in the first century, or a group even, misrepresent him by saying, Paul said, let's do evil so more good will come? So here's I'm going to reconstruct a little scenario for you. We read Galatians 2. Paul says to Peter, we Jews know that we're justified not by works of the law, Torah, 10 commandments, and all the other ones that came after it, hundreds of commandments, but by faith in Jesus. Could you imagine a scenario in which someone says, well, Paul says we're not saved by works. That means works don't matter. You can do whatever you want. Jesus can do more of his grace thing. You can believe in him, and then you sin some more, and he gives you more grace. You sin some more, and he gives you more grace. You sin some more, he gives you more grace. And you can imagine someone who doesn't like that posture saying, well, Paul's out there just making excuses for sin. Sin all you want so Jesus can save you by grace through faith. And apparently someone took that from his gospel. Let us do evil so that good may come. Paul says that's not true. That's a misrepresentation. But that's what they're saying. So he writes Romans after people misunderstood Galatians. And if you ever misunderstand Paul, just know you're in good company. If you read 2 Peter all the way to the end, it's a short letter, in chapter 3, Peter actually mentions that there are people who take Paul's words and twist them. So we're justified in our reconstruction there. People take Paul's words and twist them because, after all, they're hard to understand. So every time I'm working on a sermon with Paul and I'm struggling with it, or writing some project or an article and I'm struggling with it, I just remember Peter didn't understand half of what Paul said either. And so we're in good company if we struggle with it. But this is the thing, like Paul wrote these letters. Even Peter thought he was complicated and difficult to understand. And apparently someone misunderstood and misrepresented him when he said we're saved by grace through faith, not by works of the law. And they took that to mean that Paul just thought you could go do whatever you wanted and still be saved by grace through faith. And so Paul comes back and writes Romans. He names the misunderstanding, articulates his gospel, and then he gets to chapter 6, and he's got to offer a rebuttal to this very specific misunderstanding. Remember the question that starts Romans chapter 6? Maybe you're thinking, oh, this was a sermon on James 2. We'll get there in a second. Romans chapter 6, Paul asks the question, shall we continue in sin in order that grace may abound? So Paul's asking this rhetorical question, should we sin more to get more grace? Does that sound a little bit like the thing he's named in Romans 3? Somebody out there slanders us saying that Paul said, let's do evil so we get more good. And so Paul specifically writes Romans in part to correct the misunderstanding, to correct the misrepresentation, to name the slander. And he says, like, I'm going to deal with this. This is what they say about me. So let me raise the question. Should we continue in sin in order that grace may abound? Should we do more evil that more good may come? Should we? And what's his answer? You can say it. It's not just no. It's no in all caps with several extra O's on the end and a whole bunch of exclamation points. Has anybody ever texted you in all caps? Don't look around. It feels like they're yelling at you, doesn't it? Don't tell them that. But that's it. He is shouting, may it never be. No, absolutely not. If you've heard me declare the glories of God in the gospel, that Christ died for us to reconcile us to God, that he had mercy on sinners, and you took from that this gift of his grace means we can sin all we want and just get more grace, Paul says, you don't understand the gospel. You don't understand. He didn't die for us so we could continue in the state in which he found us. We're not going to do more evil so he can do more grace. Let me just sin some more and he can do some more grace. And then I'll sin some more and he can do some more grace and just keep on going. Paul says that's not the gospel. The gospel says he saved us so that he can transform us, so that he can turn sinners into saints, so that he can enable us to embody his character, his life, so that we can share his mind and his posture, so that his life can fill our bodies. Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Shall we do evil that good may come? No, 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 1,000 times no. That's a misunderstanding or a misrepresentation, and Paul has to correct it. Here's what I propose. James was aware of the misunderstanding and also took it upon himself to correct. And that's what we have in James 2:14 through 26. It's not James versus Paul, as sometimes it's construed. There are folks, there are books, there are scholars, maybe preachers, who just sort of put this out there and say, here it is, pretty obvious. James and Paul, contradiction. And I just don't want to let us off that easy. I think there's a credible case that both of them are attempting to deal with the misunderstanding. of the gospel that says the quality or character of our lives is irrelevant to our faith. Paul insists that believers take a certain posture. And he's happy to use the language of holiness in regard to that. James insists that believers, the character of our lives, takes a certain quality or posture. And he uses the language of good works in relation to that. Paul also uses the language of good works that Christ has fit us for. So if they're not in contradiction, if they're responding to a misunderstanding or a misrepresentation, could be either one, then we're on good grounds to hear what James has to say and learn from it. Like, what's he after? What does he want to see emerge in the life of this church? What does he want them to stop doing? What does he want them to start doing? And what does that have to do with salvation by grace through faith embodied in works?